Hey, it's Dr. Nuesse from EasyDOTphysicals.com, back again with another video. In this one, I want to discuss the question, does having a medical marijuana card exempt you from a drug test where they test for marijuana? Because the question is a little bit complicated and depends on what type of drug test we are talking about. So the answer basically to the question boils down to, does medical marijuana count like other prescription drugs count? I've done a full video on the phenomena of false positives, which basically means that you are taking a legal prescription drug and it shows up as a positive drug test result, and the whole process that you go through when that occurs, and the medical review officer reviewing the prescription and all of that. I'll leave a link to that full video up here. I won't rehash all of that, but the question really boils down to, does medical marijuana, does a prescription for medical marijuana count like these other drugs? So there are actually two at least separate answers depending on who oversees the test, what type of test that you are taking. So there are state tests or tests in states that have certain laws for private companies, and then there are very different laws, rules, and regulations for federal tests. And these laws, rules, and regulations may be changing in the future, so we'll talk about current federal regulations and the potential changes that might be occurring in the future. Okay, so when it comes down to state laws, and that's what we'll talk about first. So there are some states that have either made it illegal to test for marijuana, illegal to discriminate against somebody on a pre-employment test if they test positive for marijuana, or make it illegal to discriminate against somebody if they test positive for marijuana and they have a medical marijuana prescription. There are a number of different states. There are different state laws. I want to read all of these off to you so you have complete information. I'm getting this information from a website, nationaldrugscreening.com, and that's just where I could find the most complete information. So let's start with the states where you can test for marijuana. So these states make it legal to test for marijuana, but you cannot take adverse action against an applicant or an employee based solely on a positive marijuana test. And there are several of these states, again, as of the posting of this video, and this could change in the future. In Arizona, you can test for marijuana, but you can't discriminate against an employee if they test positive solely for marijuana. Delaware, same thing. Connecticut, Michigan, New Jersey, and Oklahoma. All right, so right away with this type of rule, having a rule where you can test for marijuana, but then just saying that you can't discriminate against an employee because they test positive for marijuana, I think it brings up an interesting point. Are we just supposed to take the company for their word? I mean, if they test you for marijuana, if a company tests you for marijuana, but your state law says that they can't discriminate against you for testing positive, and then you test positive and then you don't get the job or you get fired or whatever, can they just make up another reason? Can they just say that you were tardy too much, or that they didn't like your work ethic or something like that, and still be using that positive marijuana test as the real reason why they terminate your employment or do not hire you? So I at least think that's an interesting thing to ponder. I think that it is a subject that needs to be brought up. At least maybe there are checks in place on these companies. I don't know. I could see how companies could use positive marijuana tests to terminate an employee or not hire an employee, and then just very simply make up another reason why they weren't hiring that employee. So this one doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but those are the states that have this law in place. All right, and moving on to states or local areas where you cannot perform testing for marijuana as part of a pre-employment drug test. And there are a number of states here as well. New York is the big one. I think they were one of the first states that adopted a rule saying that you cannot actually test for marijuana as part of a pre-employment drug test. Philadelphia is another one, and Nevada is another state. So there is an exception with this particular rule. If there is, quote, reasonable suspicion that you are under the influence of marijuana while you are performing your job duties, then the states or the companies then do have the right to test you for THC marijuana. And then there is a third category, and this kind of ties back to the subject of this video of if you have a medical marijuana prescription, does that exempt you from marijuana testing, drug testing? And there are a number of states, and some of them overlap. There are a number of states that the states have statutory language requiring employers to not refuse employment or otherwise discriminate against a qualifying medical marijuana patient if you have a medical marijuana prescription. Here is the list of states: Nevada, New York again, New Jersey, Arizona, Arkansas, Connecticut, Delaware, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, South Dakota, Rhode Island, West Virginia, Minnesota, Maine, and the District of Columbia. So again, in all of those states listed, if you have a medical marijuana card and are going to get a job at a private company, not a company where the federal government needs to oversee the drug testing, then you cannot be discriminated against, again, solely based on the fact that you test positive or might test positive for marijuana, for THC marijuana. Okay, so that's state law, and that's private companies, so private companies that are in those certain states. And now we have to move over to federal law because it becomes completely different, again, currently as of the posting of this video. Because if you are, let's say, a safety sensitive employee, somebody like a truck driver, a railroad worker, a pilot, these are all jobs, safety sensitive jobs, that the Department of Transportation oversees the drug testing. And when the Department of Transportation oversees the drug testing, it is a federal test. And federally, again, as of the posting of this video, THC marijuana is still illegal. So what this means is that even if you have a medical marijuana card, you live in a state where medical marijuana is completely 100% legal, you can go to your doctor, get a prescription, and use marijuana to treat whatever condition it is prescribed for. If you test positive on a federal test, it is a positive test. Now, can you use that prescription then like you can with other prescriptions? Again, like we stated in the beginning of this video, and I've made, a complete video on this subject, but can you use that prescription like you could with a prescription for another drug that you might test positive for that might cause a false positive, and then the medical review officer review this medical marijuana prescription and then change the result from a THC test from a positive result to a negative result? The answer unequivocally as of right now is federally no, this will not happen. No matter if you have a prescription, if you live in a state where medical marijuana is legal or recreational marijuana is legal, if it is a federal test, if the federal government is overseeing and mandating the tests, and again, see safety sensitive employees for the most part, then that test is going to be positive for marijuana no matter if you have a prescription or not. So that brings me to a really important point, and I make this point in every one of my videos now going forward, is that if you are concerned about testing positive for THC marijuana, I implore you to home test multiple times leading up to that official test. That's the best way to know if you are going to test positive or not. I will leave a link to my preferred home drug test in the description box below, as well as a course that myself, in conjunction with the testing company Exploro, put together. It's about 30 minutes long. It goes through everything that basically we can't talk about here on YouTube as far as being prepared to take a drug test and giving yourself the best chance of passing, again, for THC marijuana. If you do not pass a THC marijuana test an official drug test after taking that course and following along with what we suggest, we 100% refund your money. That's how confident we are in that test. So both of those links will be in the description box below. All right, so that covers everything up to the present as of the posting of this video. But what will happen in the future? Again, if you've been following along and seen any of my recent videos, you know there's been a lot of changes coming as far as changing how marijuana in particular might be scheduled. Right now it is a Schedule 1 substance, completely 100% federally illegal. The federal government says it has absolutely no value, no medical use. It is a Schedule 1 drug. So that potentially is going to be changing to a Schedule 3 drug. So the HHS, again, I've done full videos on this. I won't go over all of it in detail, but the HHS has made a recommendation to the DEA to reschedule marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. It should happen within the next few months. Everybody's predicting that it will happen. So what could potentially happen if that does occur? So my thinking is that if that rescheduling process does occur, marijuana will still be tested for by the federal government. But probably what will happen, and this change is already kind of underway as well, is the type of testing will most likely change. So right now, the standard for the federal government is a urinalysis, and there are major problems with the urinalysis, especially when it comes to testing for THC marijuana. Again, I've done a number of videos on this subject as well. I won't go through all of that information as well, but basically you can test for marijuana multiple times longer than you can for any other of the standard drugs that are tested for. And this basically makes absolutely no sense. If somebody used marijuana 2 months ago, 3 months ago, whatever, and has not used since then, does that make them any less safe at work? If they're not using, they're not using. So my belief is once it is rescheduled, it will still need to be tested for. I mean, the federal government still tests for alcohol. Alcohol is another intoxicant. It's something that can cause you to be unsafe. I don't think anybody would disagree with this fact. Unsafe if you're operating large machines, large vehicles, things like that. Marijuana, I think, will be classified in a very similar way. So what the FMCSA federal government is currently doing is they're allowing for saliva testing. And the advantage to saliva testing for people that are needing to be tested is that the testing window is much shorter. So instead of with a urinalysis being able to test for multiple potential months of use, even if you've stopped using for multiple months, with a saliva test, you can only test for maybe a few days. But again, this is just my speculation. Nothing is set in stone here. I can't really see them going about it in a different way. I do think it still is going to be tested for, but they can't continue to test for it the way that they are if it is a Schedule 3 substance, because there are a number of other Schedule 3 substances that aren't even tested for at all. All right, so I hope that was very, very helpful and useful. Leave me any comments you have or questions in the comments section below. Be happy to answer those. And until next time, everybody, stay safe.